Good day, and welcome virtually to the Canada School of Public Service. My name is Joshua Frame. I'm the National Chair of the Federal Youth Network, and I will be the moderator of today's Storytelling Circle. I'm joined by a group of speakers that have experience and knowledge on today's topic that promises to be very enlightening. So I'm very pleased to introduce today's event titled Revolutionizing the Public Service During the COVID-19 Pandemic. I would like to acknowledge that since I am in Ottawa, I'm in the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Nation. I recognize that we all work in different places, and therefore you work on a different traditional Indigenous territory. I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on this. So on behalf of the school, I'd like to welcome all participants to this event. In order to have the best experience, we encourage you to disconnect from your VPN if possible and reconnect to the event. This will help with any sort of outages and ensure the best viewing experience for you. Throughout the event, you may submit your questions by clicking on the icon that looks like a raised hand. And there is someone monitoring the inbox, and then we'll pose the questions to our panelists. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Erica Stevens-Rennie from the FlexGC Network. And Erica is working from BC. Erica founded FlexGC with Steph Percival and has worked over the last really 8 months to kind of revolutionize the public service in terms of how we look at the virtual tools and how we look at working from home and how to make the best use of people working across Canada and across the government of Canada. So Erica, first question for you. Can you tell us about how you went from the project lead of an initiative to a co-founder of a network?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Josh. So the FlexGC initiative actually began at the Canada School almost 2 years ago, and it was an initiative focused really on shifting culture to allow for greater flexibility, particularly around work location, hours of work, and team dynamics, so moving towards distributed teams. These are things that we know benefit the employer and the employee, but we also thought that they could improve service delivery to Canadians. All those things are really important. So during the time at the school, the FlexGC initiative researched remote work best practices, created learning products for the school and for users, and then developed some small pilots on some ideas. The idea was really to build a horizontal and cohesive approach across the Government of Canada built really on collaborative learning and then refining best practices. So yeah, in February of this year, I joined the Canada School as the lead for the FlexGC initiative, not the network. And I was really excited about helping to lead that culture shift towards the Beyond 2020 principles around becoming agile, equipped, and inclusive. I saw those as really connected to flexible work. I'd become a public servant in Ottawa in 2008, but in 2011, my mentor asked me, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And so in 2011, I moved back to British Columbia, to Vancouver initially. And I've been a regional employee ever since then. So now as someone who's remote to Ottawa, I've come to know that this culture shift is really important because it can create new opportunities for people like me that are remote to Ottawa. But really also, I think more importantly, it can make a public service reflect Canada and Canadians. So it increases the talent pool available to us to hire, and that talent pool can then start to reflect the incredible diversity that we have across Canada. The other lens that I brought was that I'd just come off of working on a project on the future of work. And so I knew the importance of shifting the culture in the GC towards that greater flexibility, which we know is coming in the future of work. That's everything from service excellence to Canadians, healthy workplaces, individual job satisfaction, and really the ability to thrive at work is connected to that culture shift. So being agile, equipped, and inclusive is not just like a beyond 2020 sort of like nice thing to say, but it's connected with helping us as individuals, teams, and the entire government to really be the best we can be. So then I remember I joined the FlexGC initiative in February, and 3 weeks later, we were in the middle of a global pandemic. And that sent the majority of office workers in the Government of Canada and really around the world into their homes to try to work. For many public servants, remember that work from home order came with some other restrictions, including staying off the VPN as much as you could. It was incredibly frustrating. It was really sort of like a try to work at home situation for many of us. And I knew then that the FlexGC initiative was more important than ever as public servants grappled with this transition. And so I started piloting some ideas. So we did some FlexGC open office hours by video conference, social media, and uptake was pretty good, but it was really difficult to scale. I was the only person working on the FlexGC initiative at the school. And at the same time, there were conversations ongoing among a number of public servants, some of whom you'll meet today, who were really keen to share what they knew about working with digital tools, with varied schedules, distributed teams, working from home, and they wanted to share that knowledge with their peers. So launching the FlexGC Network emerged out of those conversations, and it was just the logical next step to allow a platform for these public servants to support their colleagues. So FlexGC Network now uses a human-centered approach to develop and deliver really timely content for our colleagues. And our key message has always been, we're here for you, we're in this together. And this was true in April, and it's still true today as we continue with these transitions. Over the course of April and May and June, the FlexGC Network provided that peer support and spent a whole bunch of time listening to public servants. So we heard a whole bunch of stories, and I'm sure some of these will resonate with many of you. Employees are feeling less stressed. Some of them are spending the time they would have spent commuting on healthy activities, walking, biking, mindfulness, time with families. We've heard stories about incredible increases in caregiving and public servants really feeling pulled in so many different directions. Public servants are dealing with incredible and long-lasting isolation in some cases, and others would really just love 1 minute alone. Some feel a constant strain from the anxiety of living through a global pandemic. Some miss their colleagues and going into the office, feeling that cohesiveness and excitement of working on something together in a shared space. Some are worried their managers are going to force them back to the office before it feels safe for them. And others are really getting quite comfortable with working from home. So there's a huge variety, diversity in these stories, and we've tried to meet the needs of public servants where they're at with coaching and learning sessions, many of them with Finn as well, things like mental health and well-being, tools and technology, distributed teams, facilitation, caregiving, balancing that with work, and how to set up a home office. By the end of June, as you know, it became clear that the pandemic was not ending soon and that the FlexGC network was really the greatest asset of the FlexGC brand. And so I think I had the pleasure really of connecting with Neil Bauer, who's also with us today, and briefing him that we should shut down the FlexGC initiative to focus entirely on letting the network continue its good work. Others at the Canada School, like the Digital Academy and Transferable Skills, are continuing to work sort of in this space as well, equipping public servants with the necessary tools to work remotely on distributed teams. But the other thing that we've found, and the thing that we're really excited to share with people today, is that there's a whole host of bright spots across the public service ecosystem. And there's stories of public servants that have grappled with really this tremendously difficult challenge. And many of them, I'm sure many of you as well, have found resiliency, ways of bouncing forward into this next transition and change. And we know that we won't go back to the way it was, and that we have an opportunity to shape a different future of work. So today, I'm really pleased, Josh, to introduce you to three of the Friends of FlexGC. And we have with us today Neil Bauer, Vice President at the Canada School of Public Service, Melanie Copeland, who's a Director with TC Transformations, Transport Canada's Transformation Office, and Honey Dakanai, she's a director at the Digital Academy as well. So Neil, Mel, and Honey are going to share with us stories about their experience kind of before, during, and after COVID, and reflect on what they think the future might hold. So if it's okay with you, maybe we'll go to Neil first. So
Fantastic.
Neil, you've had a long career in government, of undoubtedly seen a number of transitions. Can you paint us a picture of the evolution of flexible and remote work in government, kind of over the last decade, and what you think we need to do to harness the change that we've seen to position us for the future?
Okay, awesome question and awesome initiative. Actually, Erica, first I need to start with a confession. Just between us, I was a remote worker skeptic for many years. I would say for many decades. And in fact, in my career, and I think I'm the oldest one here, in my public service career, it used to be that we were tied to the office, no doubt about it. If you had work to do, you could only do work if you were in the office. And it was only by exception. In fact, it was only exceptional exceptions where telework and remote work were even entertained. And often it was in cases where there was an illness or an accommodation or some other type of extraordinary requirement. So I was really tied to the office. That was my environment. But I can remember people asking me about remote working, and I would dismiss it. I dismissed it as a colleague. I dismissed it as a manager. I dismissed it as an executive. And, I really thought that if you weren't in the office, there was no guarantee that you were working, and human nature being what it was, probably productivity would go down. And I know myself, or at least I thought I knew myself. I thought if I worked from home, I would become a teenager. I would start sleeping in, not bathing, playing video games, and sort of degenerate into my worst self. And that's the way I felt. And if you asked me 10 years ago about remote work, I would have really shaken my head at it. But I have to say, you cited some of the evidence about remote work. For sure, I saw examples of remote work in action. When I was a DG at ESDC or HRDC at the time, there was an entire group that moved out and did remote work, but it was highly transactional. But there was no question that productivity went up, and that was demonstrable. So that was very clear evidence, and maybe that was a special case at the time, and maybe that's what I thought of it. But the evidence was clear. Since then, I've had friends in the private sector who have worked in 100% decentralized organizations. And you know what? They work great. People are happier, they're productive, and when they're not productive, it's evident. And so there's nothing wrong with that kind of a management and leadership kind of paradigm. So I also have to tell you, when I was at the Food Inspection Agency, I was an ADM there, and I would tour the regional offices, and I would always wonder, why are the regional offices empty? The regional offices were empty because the people in the field were doing field work, and yet they were still required to have a place of work. And so they would have these nominal offices where they kept, their favorite children's drawings from 10 years ago, but they wouldn't be in the office very often. So it was always very ironic to me to think about, folks that are in the field doing their work and kind of artificially imposing this place where they had to call work and reserve a spot for them. So that was also something. So I would say, if I was a remote work skeptic before I became a remote work supporter, and for the last number of years, as you mentioned, and in general, I've been trying to encourage and support efforts that I've seen for more remote work, and that includes the FlexGC pilot project or initiative that you mentioned. We also bought a bunch of telepresence robots. And I wanted to buy 300 of them and create a bank so people could sign them out and sort of be a bit more revolutionary. But we ended up, I think, only buying 2 of them, and we used them for our own purposes. And that seemed like science fiction at the time, and maybe it was. And also, the free agent program has also been a big champion of remote work, and there are many free agents now that work remotely. And it just goes to show that it's not science fiction. In fact, it is. It's nonfiction. And so I would say I became a remote work supporter. And the wind was in our face up till now. With COVID, the wind has changed direction. And now we have the wind at our back in terms of momentum on digital practices. And I can remember, actually, one of my coworkers said, let's go into the office and we'll be able to see each other face to face. And so we did. We went to the office. We went for coffee together, which was awesome. And then we both logged into MS Teams and stood awkwardly beside one another as we were both logging into the same meeting. And in fact, we had to move away from each other so that the background noise didn't cause interference. And it was just the weirdest experience. And we pretty much decided never to do that again. That in fact, we're more productive and happier, when we're working in our MS Teams from our home. And we'll get together for coffee if we want to, but we won't get together to stand beside one another in remote work meetings. So for me now, the question is, so what happens now? Like, if it's true that some people are more productive and some people enjoy this flexibility, for some people it's also generating savings in terms of commuting and all the other costs that go along with work. So what happens now? A lot of people are asking, what will we keep from this experience? And my answer to that is not an exogenous question. That's an endogenous question. The answer is it depends. It depends on what we do to embed these practices and stop backsliding. And that's why I'm very excited for this event, and I'm very excited for the notion that we can make commitments around how we're going to behave in the future. And for my part, I never want to sign another piece of paper again. I do not want to limit areas of selection in the way that we used to casually to the NCR. I do not want to stop people from choosing remote work as an option for the meetings that I chair or for the offices that I'm in. And so these are the types of things I think that if we make those commitments, we're going to actually see a lot of sustained benefits from it. So I've basically gone from a remote work skeptic to a remote work supporter, but now I really consider myself a convert, and I'm a remote work convert, and I really want to embed these changes in our leadership. So I don't know if that exactly answers your question, Erica, but maybe it's a start.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Neil. You're so often on the cutting edge of innovation. And so I really value your observations around the things that you intend to do as a senior leader to help revolutionize how we work. I think next we'll go to Mel. Mel, so much of this change around remote work is really new to Transport Canada. It's a large department focused on regulating and setting the rules of the game. But TC is also midway through an incredible transformation project. And in the early days of the pandemic, Transport Canada publicly positioned itself really as a leader in remote and flexible work. Can you tell us about that? And what was your experience sort of before and during that transition?
Thanks so much, Erica. And great story, Neil. And I'm glad that we were able to convert you to the remote working side. So yeah, it's been a journey, folks. It's been a journey. So when COVID hit, we were actually able to pivot 90% of our staff really seamlessly over to remote work without having to use our business continuity plans. And the reason we were able to do that is because of our TC transformation initiative that we had started. It started around 2015 and really picked up around 2017, 2018. So in 2015, we found ourselves in a vulnerable situation, and we went through an extensive comprehensive review with Treasury Board and really created a plan to bring Transport Canada back on track. So from that plan, we generated a new vision for Transport Canada that would be agile, smart, and trusted. So a little bit similar to the Beyond 2020 principles there. And underneath that vision, we've got all of these transformation pillars that look at revolutionizing our programs and our policies. They look at service modernization, being a data-driven organization, improving public trust and transparency, and ensuring that we have a modern and inclusive workforce. So because we had started a lot of work there, that pivot to remote work was pretty seamless for us. I consider ourselves really, really lucky. So, I mean, the way it all started in the early days, 2018, I'd say, it was a lonely ride, you guys. So we were just kind of looking around who else do we talk to about this? And we were seeing all these things happen in our environment, whether it was millennials coming into the workforce with new expectations about the tools and tag they should use, or how they should be able to speak power to truth and have a voice. We were seeing new transportation modes coming in, like the Hyperloop. Is it a train? Is it a plane? What is it? How do you regulate that kind of thing? So we found ourselves in a pretty tricky spot where we weren't in a position to really provide advice on these things. So thanks to our co-design, really it was a whole of TC approach. It was employee-led. We came up with a really cool plan to bring Transport Canada into the modern digital age. So some of the things that we had already started putting in place before COVID was building a robust infrastructure. Thanks to SSC, we already had Wi-Fi going in a lot of our buildings. And I mentioned Wi-Fi, who cares about Wi-Fi now? But I mentioned Wi-Fi because it was the vector, that force to get us to start adopting digital behaviors at work, bringing your tablet to meetings, going paperless. So that was a big deal. We had tools like MS Teams already going. We were already familiar with it. And it was one of those tools that we just launched. We provided very minimal training, and we just said, let's have at it. Let's give it a try. We were equipping folks with, because of the CORD initiative, with a tablet, that one device, in some cases smartphones, and anything they needed to be mobile. And it was all about digital first delivery. So we had, our service innovation team really looking at moving more services over to digital. So once COVID hit, we made a couple tweaks, added more bandwidth to our infrastructure there, giving folks more capacity. You'll remember in the early days, they were saying, don't go on video, it'll use too much bandwidth. Now, it's a little bit better. Issuing more tablets and more smartphones and so on. We also have an IT kiosk in one of our MS Teams channels. So you can just send a quick chat. You don't have to wait on the phone, which is great for us millennials. So what is happening now? We've had to, move some folks that were physically in the workplace over to remote work. This really greatly affected our Transport Canada sectors. So that's been a really great success, and we're looking for other areas to do that. The more and more we're having conversations on the future of remote work, the more we're seeing perhaps it's a hybrid approach where as much as we can, we've got folks working from home. Folks are enjoying it. They were already working from home, perhaps part-time before. We have a ton of tools, and we've got a playbook as well to help guide employees to maintain social connections while working virtually. How do you build relationships with your staff? How do you onboard staff in a fully remote work environment? So we've constantly got resources and tips coming out of our transformation office and elsewhere. And so we were hearing early on concern from employees that they were actually nervous about heading back to the workplace. Was it going to be safe? So for those that did want to go back, either they were struggling with social isolation at home and living in a one-bedroom apartment, we made sure that if they did want to return to work, that they could, and they could do so safely. So working from home, we got to make sure it works for everyone. We've also noticed that for some roles, especially some of our inspectors, it's actually really good to have a physical presence, to be visible with the community, to play that awareness and education role with the people that you serve. And in some instances, actually smell what you're inspecting and see what you're inspecting. That sixth sense can be really important. So right now we're having conversations with the deputy and his Transport Canada executive team on what are the things that we need to do to make sure that we can continue on this path to remote work, that we make all of our digital gains stick around for the long term, and that we provide a more formal position to staff, giving them reassurance that remote work is it. And if you want to go to work, you can also do that. If you want to go to the physical workplace, you can also do that. So making sure people have the choice and feel supported. So to talk a little bit about kind of the things that we're considering like hybrid models, supporting employee choice, really, communicating the benefits of virtual work in gaining a more diverse representation of Canadian voices, especially when it comes to those remote Indigenous communities or the Francophone voice. How can you support mental health and social connections and wellness? That is a huge, huge concern for the deputy. How do you ensure employee productivity and performance? Neil was talking about, it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind, and that kind of that theory X thinking of, if I can't see my staff, I'm not quite sure if they're working, as much as they could. So it's about addressing some of those fears and myths about remote work. Identifying competencies to be an effective leader in a virtual environment. Empathy and relationship building and communication is so key, and making sure that we're continuing to expand on our infrastructure. And to link back again to Neil's story, change takes time. Culture change takes time. So what our team does is we'll have sit downs with staff at all level, talk to them about their dreams, their fears, their hopes, and what they want out of remote work or out of their work. And how can we find a way to help them accomplish that. So that's my story, or our story.
Yeah, thanks, Mel. What an incredible story of a transformation project that continued to put people first. And that was one of the things that really attracted, I think, FlexGC to want to collaborate with you guys. I'm stuck a little bit on your emphasis of how important that Wi-Fi was for seeding your transformation to remote work. So you made some really neat observations there. And then I'll also add for the audience, if you don't know, the playbook that Mel's referenced is a really tremendous resource. So we'll make sure that we include that in the resources that we send after. And now we'll go to Honey. So Honey, you're at the Digital Academy. The Digital Academy also has some great resources. Much of what we're hearing from Neil and Mel about working in the open, collaborating widely, is really embedded in the digital standards, which your organization, the Digital Academy, is really baked into what you do. You've also had the opportunity of working not just federally, but also at the provincial government. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience working in two of those organizations that really so deeply live and breathe these values?
For sure. Feel very fortunate that I'm part of this panel. I'm loving the story so much because I do share like a lot of the sentiments that we've heard from both Neil and Melanie, and also from you, Erica, as you've just started to describe the work and the challenges that you encountered trying to set this initiative up. I'm one of those radicalized employees in a way, in that I came from two organizations led by two very radical leaders. And so the previous organization in the Ontario government was led by Hilary Hartley. So I came from the Ontario Digital Service, where as far back then, we were distributed by default. And so employees had the option to work where it was comfortable, pretty much. And this was a time, so 2016-17, when to decide to go and work remotely meant you had to fill out 8 different forms and get different kinds of approvals. And there's a stigma around it, because to do this kind of puts you in this position where you either have to pretty much present the accommodation that you require and sort of own up to it. And then there's also this idea that, oh, they're probably not that ambitious, or they probably have no large career aspirations, and they're not top of mind. They tend to get forgotten at meetings when it's come time to think about talent management opportunities. And so anyway, while we were discussing a lot of these types of arrangements, I remember our deputy actually saying that no, this is about the work getting done, not about where you work and how you do it. This is about us providing a support structure for our employees. And that really cemented for me to see that institutional type of, I guess, support for something like this starting to become real, because again, when you hear it from the top down, it becomes very easy. A lot of barriers that were perceived all of a sudden get, I guess, re-examined, and we make the good path easy. And so that notion of trusting people in order to deliver, that has really stuck with me. And so people and teams deliver at the speed of trust. And if we want to, like, the more you're entrusted, the more they're likely to rise to the occasion. And that was the principle that was sort of around, that went around pretty much how we delivered at the Ontario Digital Service. And I was fortunate going to the Digital Academy. I joined a very similar environment. And so I am under Neil's leadership, and I know I was part of a team that was already distributed by default, and so this was my first time managing a very distributed team across time zones. And so I work in Toronto. I'm not from the National Capital Region, and so already that was probably a big shift for. It's not a common decision for executives to to do this from the regions, but I also felt that it was something that I could also bring, and because it also meant there would be a voice for other people who were not in the National Capital Region. I am not going to lie, pre-COVID, I felt it was very challenging because, again, I was getting to know the federal government, getting to know like work at the academy and the broader school. And so that was, in the beginning, I was really tempted to sublet a colleague's place. And but then during the pandemic, we also found that it was a very different dynamic. Like everybody, again, I think the empathy first or people first approach is probably what sort of changed a lot of the things for me, for the team. And so the Academy has been at pretty much at the forefront. I'm really proud and humbled to say to when it comes to developing a remote work guide, for example, very quickly they crowdsourced a lot of resources for managers and for teams who were adjusting to remote work, and then also a lot of resources around mental health, learning and development tools that were available. And so all of those are on busrides.ca. And then in addition to that, the team also provided WebEx training support. And so a lot of the classes that the school offered shifted to virtual delivery. And so the school's way of default delivery method went from in-person, in-class, to pretty much doing all of this online. And so making sure that the teams had the ability to provide production support and just reorient to this new environment. And that was an investment that the team was able to make. I think that in terms of the future, I think the same principles will apply. I agree with Mel that a lot of people will probably, some people will opt to be at work, some people will opt to be at home, and we need to be able to accommodate for both. We need to also provide the institutional support structure. I think it's on the organization pretty much to make sure that it's not just about employee choice. Like we downloaded quite a lot of things to employees, and so what does that look like in terms of again? I think we now know that everybody need, when one person is dialing in remotely, everybody is dialing in remotely. Like we're not going to have a situation anymore where somebody's staring into a boardroom table and with a room full of people and they forget somebody is speaking. And then also for advancement implications, we no longer favor one region over another or opportunities and that are provided. I'm hoping that that becomes institutionalized as something done more equitably. And then, of course, the notion of trust and what and where things get done, I think is something that we probably need to build in. And so I'm hoping that we no longer think of things as a 9 to 5 and we think about employee norms. And I guess I wonder if people are familiar with the personal manual or the user manual for me. I know there were 2 editions that are circulating around. I'm hoping we could share after the session.
Yeah, absolutely. Honey, we'll make sure that those get in the list of resources as well. So yeah, thanks for your comments and your story. I really love the emphasis on the importance of trust and that sort of teams really deliver on the speed of trust. I think it's beautiful. But it's also really resonating with me as I reflect back on the teams that I've worked on. And also Neil and Mel, some of your stories too in the intersection there, thinking around where and how remote work really worked. Yeah, I think the future, we've heard from all of you, the future of teams is definitely distributed teams, as some choose to go back to the office and some choose maybe to stay home or somewhere else than Ottawa. So Josh, those were really 3 stories that we were excited to share with Finn in the school. So I'll turn it over to you now. I'd love to hear your thoughts from where you're sitting around your reflections on these 3 stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And so thanks very much, Erica and Neil and Mel and Honey for sharing your stories and your journeys with your organizations. Interestingly enough, Honey and I were on a panel about the future of work the day before we got notification that we were kind of shutting down Canada. And we were both in Toronto for that. And we were kind of saying, it'll be interesting to see where this goes. Like if we work from home for 3 months, I think was what we were expecting at that time. You're going to have workers that at the end of those 3 months are going to say, well, I don't want to go back into the office full time ever again. But now that we're, well past 3 months and 8 months, 7, 8 months into this reality, I think it's really changed how we've worked. And I think each of your organizations have highlighted how that can change. Certainly from you, Neil, it was great to hear kind of your experience and your thoughts around your perception of telework. And I think that's something that many of us heard earlier on in our careers from leaders saying, well, if you're not in front of me, how do I know that you're accomplishing your tasks? Or I'd be fine with you working from home, but if you work from home, then so-and-so will work from home. And then I won't be able to, control the output because, they need to be managed more closely. And certainly, Honey, from your experience with the provincial government as well, and really the digital transformation that's happened there, to be able to apply that to the federal government and then apply it to this new reality, I think has really benefited the government of Canada. Mel, as well, in terms of TC, I think you've kind of shown that the organizations that were already looking at digital transformation kind of position themselves well to not be scrambling on March 16th, but to be kind of advancing their plans in a faster manner, but not necessarily, coming up with a completely different plan. So really interesting to see. So now I'll turn it over to Steph Percival, who is going to tell us a bit about how each and every one of us can be part of this collective action to contribute to a positive culture shift. Steph is the free agent and the co-lead of the FlexGC Network. So Steph, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you to all of our storytellers so far. I've been jotting down quotes because there are so many quotables from this session. So like Josh said, I'm co-lead of the FlexGC Network, and I'm here to introduce you to a new initiative by FlexGC. But before I do that, I wanted to share a little bit of my story with you. So I'm what you might call an accidental free agent, or accidental public servant, I should say. Growing up on the East Coast, the public service wasn't really on my radar as a potential career option. But I was lucky enough to have a friend in the public service who encouraged me to apply to a job poster and walked me through the in-depth process. And so I ended up becoming a public servant based out of Halifax. And my first role in government was in procurement, which is an incredibly important function in government, but it's not one that I'm necessarily passionate about. And so I started keeping my eye on job advertisements in Halifax. And as I did that, it became clear to me how difficult it would be to bust out of the procurement bubble from where I was, where public service career opportunities were a lot more limited, and the ones that did come up that I was interested in required experience I didn't yet have. And one day, just for fun, I compared the number of job postings in Halifax to the number of job postings in Ottawa. And there were more than 10 times the postings open to the NCR only. And at that point, I really hit this pivotal moment in my career of realization that if I wanted to move out of the bubble that I felt like I was in, I had to move to Ottawa. And so I did. I left behind family and friends, and I left behind colleagues that I loved because at the time it felt like the only way to get on a public service career path that I would love. Since moving to Ottawa, I've had a really rich career, especially since I became a free agent 4 years ago. And so it was absolutely the right move for me. But it's also one that I wish people didn't have to make. So I've spent about 5 years of my career, the past 5 years, really working and focusing on helping to improve employee experiences. And as the lockdown was looming, I could personally feel the weight of the pressure that was about to be placed on the shoulders of public servants. And I think everyone at FlexGC, like who ended up in the network, could feel that. For many of you, it was your first time working remotely with kids at home, potentially sharing a work environment with your partner, or feeling completely alone while being in lockdown during a pandemic. That is a lot of weight on everyone's shoulders. And then in many cases, there was also a lot of uncertainty around how to optimize your work experience while working away from your colleagues. And so, as Erica shared, the FlexGC Network was born to help with that. And here we are, we're 7 months into this pandemic, and for many of us working remotely, and we all have this new shared experience. Before, for most of us, working from home was the exception, not the norm. I think like Neil's story definitely highlighted that. And before, we didn't really give a lot of consideration to how virtual meetings were run, or how to manage offsite employees, or how we connect and communicate virtually. I think it's safe to say that working from home has been normalized now, even if working from home during a pandemic feels anything but normal. But there's still a lot more that we can do to optimize the remote or distributed work experience for ourselves, our teammates, and our employees. So today, we're launching the FlexGC Digital Nomads. FlexGC Digital Nomads are Government of Canada employees who want to join in a collective effort of creating flexible and empathetic work environments. We know that there's a lot of work that can only be done by our organizations to position our work environments to become more flexible, such as policy changes, process and technology improvements, and redefining how we measure results and productivity. But each of us as public servants can play a role in contributing to how we work together and how we interact with one another in our own teams and organizations. This includes thinking about things like hosting digital by default meetings, posting jobs that are open across Canada, focusing on results-based tasks, prioritizing the mental health of yourself and your team, and testing and increasing your comfort level with digital tools. And that's just to name a few of the actions that we can all take as individuals. By signing on to become a FlexGC Digital Nomad, you can identify the behaviors and practices that you will actively adopt to enhance inclusive, respectful, and healthy workplaces. When you sign the pledge, you can sign your name, or you can choose to be anonymous. You can check off specific actions you will commit to, and you can customize the pledge by adding your own statement of what actions you will take in your workplace. Canada's public service is recognized as a world-class public service. To remain that way, we have to continue evolving our workplace practices to keep up with current trends that allow us to improve employee experiences and quality of work. Based on the research that we've done at FlexGC and on the stories we've heard, we firmly believe that workplaces that are empathetic to the diverse range of circumstances, preferences, and roles of individual public servants are better poised to recruit and retain talent, have happier and healthier and more productive employees, are more diverse and inclusive environments, have the potential for positive environmental impact, and are better prepared for the future of work. So each of us can play a role in creating this kind of workplace. If you want to actively strive towards this, then we're inviting you to take the FlexGC Digital Nomads Pledge and to share it with your colleagues. We'd love for you to use it as a jumping off point for conversations with your team on how you will collectively work towards making your office a healthy and flexible work environment. You can find us on Twitter, you can visit our website, and you can visit our GC Collab to put your hand up and say, I'm a FlexGC Digital Nomad. So I'm a FlexGC Digital Nomad because I want to help create the conditions for opportunities without boundaries across the public service, and because I believe flexibility is key to creating healthy work environments and healthy public servants. So as I close, I want to thank all of you for joining us, and I want to ask each of you who are on the line today, what will your reason for being a FlexGC Digital Nomad be? Back over to you, Josh, for Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Steph. So we'll start off the Q&A with a question for Neil, because I think, Neil, we appreciate your leadership really on this topic. and in pushing innovation and innovative approaches to how the public service works that you've done for many, many years. I think my first experience hearing you was at an Ontario Federal Council meeting in Toronto maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where you were talking about, something cool at the time. And I think, lots of people have sort of followed you and followed your career because you're continuing to drive that innovation. So I guess when we look at how your view changed in terms of remote work, how you kind of reformed that view over time, what is being done to support and encourage leaders to embrace an innovative mindset in this regard as they're trying to deal with the new normal? So what can you say to managers who are leading teams virtually for the first time?
Thanks, Josh. And first of all, I just want to say I think the pledge is a fantastic idea because it helps to activate people and show that it's not that weird to do nomadic work or to do flex work. So it's absolutely brilliant. To a first-time manager of a virtual team, the first thing I would say, just in general, is don't panic. It's not that unusual. There are supports for you. Some of the resources that Honey mentioned and that Melanie mentioned are actually directed towards managers and leaders. And for my part, I would say there are sort of 3 superpowers for leadership in their remote work world. One of them is empathy. So, every manager and leader should embrace the idea that they should get to know their people better. They should be more deliberate and sustained about building relationships with their team. And when it's done through remote work, you might do that differently, but it just kind of forces you to do the right thing anyway. So the first superpower is empathy. The second superpower, I would say, is focus. You focus on the work that needs to be done. You look at the progress. If you're focusing on the work and if your remote team is focusing on the work, you'll know where the productivity is and where it isn't. You don't need to worry that out of sight is out of mind because nobody's out of sight if you're focused on the thing and making progress on the thing. And I would say then the third superpower is communication. And as every good leader knows, if it nudges you to be more deliberate and sustained in your communication with your people, well, that's fantastic. So to executives and managers and leaders out there, I would say, focus on these 3 superpowers: empathy, focus, and communication. And I think that takes hopefully the fear of the unknown out of it and makes it basically just good leadership.
Awesome. And I'll just remind all our participants that you can use the raise hand button to ask a question, and then we'll pose that to our panelists. But Mel, do you have any other thoughts in terms of how leaders can kind of adapt to this new reality? How the executive level can kind of adapt to this new reality?
Yeah, we've been having a lot of conversations about how folks can either start their own movement within their organization, or for those feeling like their executives are not quite there, how can you kind of help push them along? So, we've been hearing a couple things. Some folks in any position are feeling, listen, for some of these things, it would almost take a whole of department or a whole of GC approach to get some sort of change to happen. And brought this up with the deputy, and he had a really interesting comment. He said, we just got to do the thing and show the thing. And with that success, he used that as leverage to drive change either within your organization or throughout the GC. So for those feeling like, listen, I'm kind of feeling alone, like nobody's on the same page, reach out. You've got some great folks on the line today. Start building your network of folks that think like you. Somebody in our French session mentioned that. Look for folks that have those same values as you do, for those fellow digital nomads that will help you with kind of les conseils, the tools and tricks to help move things along. So I would say definitely leverage social media, but as well leverage some of the stuff coming out of Treasury Board and some of the stuff that Honey's working on. So the GC digital standards, those are not just for people in IT. Those are behaviors and ways of working for anyone in the digital era. And he's giving me a thumbs up there. You've got the policy on service and digital. Take a look at that. You've got leverage in there. And think about, if you're starting your own movement, think about who your first followers might be. Is it your colleagues, your team? Is it your own director? Think about something that would fit seamlessly with the work that you already do. Think about the level of effort and time you're willing to invest in kind of sharing your way of doing things and your modern ways of approaching tasks. So that's what I would add.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mel. Okay, next question. So Steph, you mentioned, wanting to move your career forward and then doing so by moving to the National Capital Region from Halifax. But in this vein, so not all roles can be done remotely. So Melanie, you mentioned, an airplane inspector might need to be on site to inspect an airplane. Neil, you might have some solutions in terms of, iPads on segways that can do that inspection remotely, but maybe not this year for sure. So not all roles can be done remotely. But if an individual chooses to work remotely, will that put limitations on career advancement? And how quickly do you see departments hiring workers with remote by default? I think so far we've seen kind of a couple sort of testing job postings where they've said, there was one for PCO a couple weeks ago where they said open to anyone across Canada. And they even encouraged, people in different time zones to apply because the work hours were 12 to 8 Eastern. So they said, well, if you're working in BC, it's 9 to 5. But how do you see this? How do you see this working? Do you see working remotely as being a career limiting factor, or is that starting to change as we're going forward? Who would like to chime in first? Mel, over to you.
I can go ahead. We're deep in these conversations right now because our primary concern at this point is just to make sure that we're providing a firm enough position on hybrid or remote work so that employees can begin to make life decisions about a career, where they live, and so on. I don't think it's limiting, and I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of opening up people's minds to the possibilities. But when I think about the inspector community, for example, because they're the folks really that for the most part, they have to be in the field and they have to have this presence. We're actually exploring technology and how technology could come in and help to, one, provide remote inspection. So not only protecting the inspectors from hazardous environments or COVID, but also giving opportunities to those that might not be physically available to go there. They might have accessibility considerations. So you're really opening up a lot of opportunities through technology. So I don't think it's career limiting at all. And I think what's important is to really voice concerns and to have that communication. So find a way to get involved in the decision making somehow, get your voice heard, go online. And it's up to leaders as well to make sure that when they're providing policies on, are we doing national by default, statement of merit criteria or things like that, think about the work that needs to be done. And think about your user, so the person applying to the job. What will help to attract that person to that role? Is there anything right now that we could do to help provide more options? I spoke earlier about giving employees that choice, and I think it will be important to continue giving that throughout.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, 12 months ago, we would have answered this question very differently and said, if you want to get to a manager level, most departments are in a place where you have to do that from the office 5 days a week or at least, 4 days a week. So I think we're really making advances of not only, what's emblematic of 8 months of progress, but probably like a decade worth of progress in terms of advancing these mindsets. Would anyone else like to chime in on question number 2? Neil, over to you. Sorry, Neil, you're on mute, so that's great, because then if that's on your bingo card for today's webcast, you have filled out that one. It's the phrase of 2020.
I can't.
No, you're good. You're good.
Good.
Oh, great. I just want to put a +1 on what Mel said to say that I actually think it should be better for your career. And the analogy I would give is that when we see small businesses, the small businesses that can pivot and can go digital are the ones that are surviving and thriving. It's very analogous, I think, to public servants. If you can pivot and if you can become digital, it should open up opportunities to you and hopefully will be better for your career options. So I would just put a booyah on what Mel said.
Yeah, absolutely. Honey, over to you.
Echoing the same. So right there, essentially, the people who are able to adapt more quickly are pretty much the ones who will thrive. And the additional point I wanted to make was that I think the environment we're in is probably twice as challenging for leaders, in that I think we're going to ask a lot more of leaders, in that they need to be more active when it comes to providing support and removing barriers to the team's progress and communicating clearly and with structure, and not actually over communicating. You can't do it enough. And also allowing for asynchronous communication, but in a way that doesn't sort of burden an employee. So my brilliant idea at 9 p.m. on a Friday night, I am not going to post it somewhere where it will burden somebody. And so again, so that's where we need to also be more self-aware of not only of the things we're doing, but also the impact that it has on people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, going on to the next question. So this one's for you, Erica. Okay, so this is hard. So we miss our friends, we miss our colleagues. Some of us have children at home. Some of us have rambunctious cats at home. And some people are alone and isolated and feeling alone and isolated and anxious. So how can we find some mindfulness resources to kind of support us during this time?
Yeah, and I would add, some of us, myself included, have like rambunctious children who behave like rambunctious cats half the time. So yeah, mindfulness for me, I would say, includes like two things based on the readings that I've done around anxiety and how to reduce anxiety. So we often think about mindfulness as meditation, but another thing to not forget, particularly as we've moved into our homes, is the connection with physical activity. So physical activity is as effective as mindfulness in reducing anxiety. And so those two things, I think, should work together, particularly as some of us have given up our morning commute, which might have included walking or biking or physical activity. So find ways to add that physical activity back. Recognizing at home, it looks different. We're trying to sort out, those of us with children and cats, how to carve out that time. If you have childcare, that can be easier. So you'll need to find out a time that works for you. For me, sometimes that means waking up early before they're awake. So find a time and figure out, is it mindfulness or physical activity or some of each sometimes. Personally, I find that I have some favorite YouTube sites that I go to for both yoga, like more intense physical activity, and then sort of very short mindfulness tracks. And I try and try and make sure that I'm allowing myself these micro breaks. I find my days are quite busy, but I can always take a micro break, and to make it possible for yourself to get up and move and do that. So at FlexGC, we have actually curated a list of tools we love, and we're launching a FlexGC website. So we'll send out that link to you. There is a tools we love section there. So you'll find that in your email inboxes, I think probably today or Monday. So watch for that.
Awesome. Thanks, Erica. And to add to the ways that you can sort of engage in mindfulness exercises and things to really take care of yourself during this time, I will say that the FYN will be hosting a webcast on October 29th with Body Break with Hal Johnson and Joanne McLeod from Body Break. And their message is going to be very resonant to these times. I think talking about maintaining a good physical health and mental health, and talking about their journey to really impact, I think, all of us across the Government of Canada. So we'll include instructions to register for that in the follow-up email to our participants. Next question. So Neil said what the future looks like depends on what we do to stop from backsliding. So I think the environment we're in right now could change 6 months from now if 100% of people are back in the office. It doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. But what can we do to create more remote work converts? First off to this question, I would say sign the digital nomad pledge and be one of the people who's actively embracing this as a way of working going forward. But what else can we do to ensure that the public service of 2020 doesn't move back after we are over with the pandemic? I'll go to Honey, and then Mel, and then Erica.
So I would default to the digital standards at this point, and also so start with users. So start with people, and so we get that guidance in terms of, and this is our great opportunity to rethink the entire sort of employee experience from the time they're hired to the time that they decide it's time to move on. But we need to think about that more holistically, and also not think about them as resources. And so we think about what does that experience look like? What can that be, so that we are actually supporting them. We're growing. We're also pretty much providing that human side. And I think we win with honestly, we win by being human, and we win by actually acknowledging that part first, and taking care of that first. I think, what is that saying? Sort of take care of the water and the fish will be okay. And so I would begin there.
Absolutely. Thanks, Honey. Melanie, over to you.
For us at Transport Canada, we ADCAR everything. So if you're not aware of the ADCAR model, it's a pro-size change management methodology. And the reason I'm saying it is it's a really effective tool to really get to the core reasons why folks are resisting. And, you know, in the end, it's not about forcing people to do something that they don't want to do. You really want to make sure that you're building that genuine desire for them to want to work remotely. So I would start off by giving them awareness of generally the benefits and the how to work remotely. Then you want to build that desire. So get to know what their fears are about working remotely and address those things head on. So a lot of one-on-one conversations. Do not underestimate the effort and time needed to get through those motions. Then for knowledge, I mean, I've spoken to some folks that say, Mel, like, I've bought into the remote work thing. I'm not sure how to do it. Like, I'm about to retire. I feel like I'm falling behind. I'm not digitally savvy. Like, how do I keep up with all these tools? So give folks the resources and the training to be able to do it. In terms of ability, give them the time. That learning curve for some can be steep. I remember coming back from mat leave and folks saying, hey, we're on MS Teams now. What is MS Teams? So, I mean, it took me a good 3 weeks to get used to it, and I consider myself pretty tech savvy. And then reinforcement. Take a look at that messaging, and it takes a lot of repetition, and making sure that you've got those structural things in place to help you. So whether it's sponsorship support from your leadership, or structurally the way that your processes and models are created. I would say as well, take care of yourselves. As a leader, trying to encourage change can be really taxing emotionally. So take a step back and make sure that you're taking care of yourselves as well.
Absolutely. Over to you, Erica.
Awesome. So obviously sign the pledge. That's a big part. Engage with FlexGC if you need anything as well. We would also like to encourage people to participate in pulse check surveys. So there's some circulating now around remote work and mental health. There's also the upcoming public service employee survey. So these are important signals to teams working around creating healthy work environments in the public service. So those are really important. Another thing I would say is to really emphasize communication on your team. This is true if you're an employee, just a team member on your team, or if you're a manager. So you should be communicating regularly with your team and your manager about what you need. And one of the great frameworks that at FlexGC we like is the team charter. So that's been advocated by the Canada School. They have some great resources up on their website. Again, we'll share those out for you, or you can find them if you Google canada.ca team charter. But the team charter Charter provides sort of a container to have a conversation around team values, norms, how you're going to use various tools, how you're going to handle when someone has to go handle caregiving responsibilities for elders or children. And fronting all those things and creating some team consensus about that can be really, really important to making sure that you're all on the same page. And then finally, I'd add sort of to Mel's point around, some of us have bought in, but we're not sure about the how. And remote work, just like learning anything new, it's a great opportunity to just ask questions, be a human, ask a question. How do I do that? Is there a tool that I can use to do that? We're all learning. And so much now I find like not only are we doing our own jobs, but we're often the frontline tech support for our own devices. We are building our home offices. We are making the tea and coffee. We're like all the things now. And it's okay not to be good at all those things and to ask for help and advice.
Absolutely. So we'll move on to the next question. So we seem to have a lot of questions coming in from participants around very specific policies. So we're not going to try to purport to be experts around those policies because we are not experts on that. But if we can talk more generally about the work that's being done to kind of update some of these policies in terms of assessing performance, protecting confidential documents, telework agreements, managing official languages. How do we kind of get these sorts of instruments updated to reflect our modern reality? I'm thinking back to my first experience working by telework, working from Toronto for an area in Ottawa, and the telework agreements were like very, very regimented. It was a whole sheet of like, okay, well, what are your hours on, and where are you working from on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? Which hours are remote and which hours are from an office, and all this sort of stuff that don't really reflect our reality now. So how do we kind of work on getting some of those policies changed? And maybe Steph, I'll put you on the spot since you're working at the Office of the Chief Human Resources Officer in terms of some of what's happening there to really reflect the reality of government today.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you for putting me on the spot. I can't officially talk to the work that OCRO is doing, except to say that that it is an organization that cares about public servants, and it does care about moving forward with current trends. But there is a lot of work that happens behind the scenes for those things to evolve. What I can say outside of official policies is that there's a lot of flexibility in how we choose to operate as teams, as managers, as employees, and we should exercise that flexibility to create those empathetic conditions on our own teams, to create those broader opportunities. I think about things like, I remember when I was at the Digital Academy myself last year, we had to fill out those standard telework forms because it was checking a box for the organization. But we were also given a lot of flexibility in how we filled out those forms. So even though there were very specific fill in the blanks on those forms, I remember putting days of work Monday to Friday, up to 37 and a half hours a week, from home or anywhere else that's convenient for working purposes. We built that flexibility in for ourselves as a team and as a group. So there are lots of practices like that. Even in terms of thinking about things like workflow, I think one of the sticking points right now in working effectively as a remote or a distributed team is in trying to manage or work exactly the same way we did in the office, and it doesn't function quite the same way. So I think comfort with just trying different things. There are lots of great tools that can help you work digitally. I think about Kanban boards. I'm a huge fan of Trello myself, which is a way to organize workflow and show the work that an entire team is doing and keep things very up to date. It's almost like a user-friendly tracker, if that makes sense, that's in real time and collaborative. And I know that for a lot of organizations, MS Planner has been downloaded as part of the integration for Microsoft Teams. So then we have that Government of Canada like corporate tool. So I would just say think about don't always tie yourself to those overarching policies, which yes, we must follow, but think about what makes sense for your team, and then have those really open conversations and find the groove that works for you.
Awesome. So we'll move on to the next question. So Erica was mentioning working with flexibility. So what advice do you have for public servants who are also allergic to being tied to an office? Just to be clear, I don't know that that's an official allergy unless it's accompanied by a doctor's note. But similarly, what advice do you have for those who are longing to go back to the routine of being back in the office? So Mel, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, my bit will be really short. So, I mean, this happened to me recently because, and I said this during the French session, in the early days, we were super enthusiastic about working from home. And then 6 months in, it kind of you're tired of seeing your bedroom and you kind of want to change. So what I started doing that I found really helpful is just incorporating some of that pre-COVID routine at home. So putting my alarm on early, getting ready, my hair and my makeup done, putting on some real clothes and not being in my pajamas all day, and then finding myself a real table and a real chair to work from, and working out in my calendar kind of a real lunch break where I can go get a sandwich somewhere or go get a coffee like I would at work. And finding ways to get those water cooler conversations going. So whether it's on social media or through MS Teams chat, just to bring about a little bit of normalcy, because I think where we were getting into, 3 months into COVID was this weird work-life integration where all the lines were kind of blurred and people ended up working really long hours. So it's good to kind of set your limits and to bring a little bit of pre-COVID back into your daily routine.
Yeah, absolutely. Neil, maybe we'll go to you for thoughts on this one. Oh, sorry. You just muted, actually, Neil. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
okay,
perfect.
Sorry for my technical problems. One thing I would say is get your home office sorted out. And I would say, just to repeat really that these are new routines. It's new for a team. And I would say the number one thing to do is to reach out to your colleagues and don't let remote work put you into a bubble or into a compartment. It's sort of ironic that by remote working you could be sort of confined, but in fact you should make more of an explicit effort to really get to know people. Those are people in your work unit, but they're people outside of your work unit and even outside of your normal circles. So it should be an opportunity really to broaden. That would be my number one piece of advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Erica, over to you.
Yeah, I think for me, this question, the word longing really sparks something. And I think what I would want to say to everybody is we are living through a global pandemic. It's not entirely unprecedented, but it's been unprecedented in our lives. And we will have longings for things that were normal before. And so what I want to say is there will be a vaccine and there will be therapies that are effective and things will go back to normal. And for now, it's okay to have those longings and to acknowledge that they exist and they're a part of you and a part of lots of big feelings that you and your family have. And so it's okay to sort of live in this in between right now, because we are moving towards a place where these days will be gone and we will be living into the next normal. And so, I think others have made great comments about what to do if you're allergic to the office, which is me, and what to do if you're longing to go back, which I admit I did love my trips to Ottawa. But yeah, I would just say live into those longings. It'll help you understand what you most appreciated about your life and know how to recreate the life that you want most when you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, of the people on this panel today and the participants who are watching, there's not a single one of us who hasn't had their life very drastically affected and changed by this pandemic, and over the last 7-8 months, who hasn't changed completely how they do things. So I think you made a really good point, Erica, of we will have a future where this is not our reality, and we can look forward to that future hopefully soon. Next question. So there's a participant question that they would like to hear more from Melanie on the transformation office and lessons learned on what worked and what did not work.
Absolutely. So feel free to always reach out to me. I'm at Copeland309 on Twitter. We've got the Transport Canada GCPDS site with all of our transformation information there. So perhaps I can I can send the link out through this group after the session. And we're actually moving our whole website to GitHub, so it'll be accessible outside of the GC network, which is even better. In terms of what worked and what didn't, I mean, what worked was absolutely that sponsorship level support. You have the deputy and you have our chief digital officer, Julie Lease, with their, their grand vision, and they were really clear about where they wanted the organization to go, kind of what needed to happen. And they just repeated, they were so consistent with their vision around that and their storytelling around that. As well, I mean, what really helped was we did awareness sessions with staff. I mean, our Chief Digital Officer, Julie Lease, took a good 3 hours with each team at TC to kind of go through the TC vision, the pillars, and what's changing and why and where are we going, to really get everyone on board. And what my team is now doing, especially this year, is just trickling down at every level of the organization to make sure transformation resonates with everyone. And the deputy is really clear, like he wants transformation to be part of our DNA. Every decision we make, we have to think about our TC vision and the GC digital standards. So they're very clear about that. What some of the challenges have been, I mean, COVID for sure, in terms of people's morale and people's ability to absorb change. There's a lot happening at once, and they kind of need time to digest everything that's going on. And so we had paused a lot of transformation activities right when COVID hit, just to give folks a chance to kind of settle. And since September, it's really ramped up again. And dealing with resistance. I mean, resistance will be everywhere. It's part of the job to make sure that messaging is really clear with everyone. So I'd say making sure that especially our team in the transformation office or other leaders in our organization trying to influence and drive change, making sure that they're well supported, and that they know, resistance is okay. It's part of the process. You'll get over the hump, and finding good strategies to get through that. So I'm happy to share lots more tips and tricks and our experience so far.
That's awesome. Thanks, Melanie. So now we'll go, I think, to probably our last question of today's session. So do you think the shift to remote work has led to efficiency? So particularly allowing people to complete their work in less than the typical amount of time? And could we be shifting to a more productive model with less overall hours required to complete that work? Who would like to tackle this first?
I could jump in, Josh.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan.
Just to say, I think in pockets, yes, I think there are areas of work that will be more productive, more creative, more inclusive, and more agile as a result of the shift to remote work, but it's not going to be universal. So there will be shifts, and we need to keep our eye on the ball as we go. So that's my perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's any universal answer to this one to say, people will be able to accomplish work in less time. The fears of leaders, a few years ago, as Neil was mentioning, was, well, if you're home and you're doing your laundry and you're doing your dishes and you're taking, your dog out, well, how much work are you accomplishing during that time? So home also presents many distractions. I think people are getting better at understanding how to separate out those periods of time. And I think I would point to the book Flow by I can't remember the author now, or can't remember the correct pronunciation of the author. I believe the last name is Csikszentmihalyi. But he talks about getting into this, flow of work and productivity and creativity. And I think that's something that's easier to achieve in an environment of having more control over your environment, not having colleagues, come by every 10 minutes and sort of mess up that flow of work. But you can also have more distractions at home. The UPS guy comes by, your dog is barking on a video conference, whatever the case may be. So it's interesting to see how this will progress over time. I think at this point, we'll turn to each of you to give sort of a quick kind of closing thoughts. And maybe we'll start off with you, Steph, and then I'll give closing remarks for the session. And we'll go to a video that's talking about the Digital Nomads initiative. So Steph, over to you.
Thank you, Josh. And if you hear someone in the background, that is my husband.
And sorry, Steph, you're on mute.
I was unmuted and then I was muted again. See, Neil, you're not alone in the mute woes. I was saying, if you hear someone in the background, my husband works right across the room from me, so that is my work from home reality. But I'm going to shamelessly, before I do closing remarks, just answer that last question, because I was jotting down notes as you were asking, and I think that there are certainly efficiencies to be gained from working from home. There's a lot of research out there that shows that remote workers actually can be more productive than in-office workers. And I know that there are at-home distractions, but there were also a lot of in-office distractions. And depending on the type of work that you do, for example, if you write a lot in your work, it can be way more efficient than trying to sit down and write something while you're interrupted constantly in the office. I think it's contingent on two things. It's contingent on really good communication, and part of that is showing the work that needs to be done. So that communication between employees and managers, and then it's also about equipping yourself to be able to use the virtual tools, and to be able to collaborate online, because it can be done really well. We have lots of teams like the Digital Academy and the TC Transformation team that show that it can be done really well. But you have to be open to that comfort and trying it. And I actually worry sometimes that if we don't set boundaries on our time at home, that the opposite is true and we're actually too productive. And it's really important to make sure that you close up at the end of the day and take that break, because leisure time is really important to productivity as well. So I just want to answer that, and then say I really appreciate everyone joining us today. FlexGC has a new website, like Erica mentioned. We'll share all of these resources after this session, and I was reminded to let you know that FlexGC Network is also recruiting. So we have lots of interesting work that we do behind the scenes to help support public servants. So if you want to be part of a really amazing network of caring people, just reach out to us, and we'd love to hear from you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Steph. Okay, Mel, over to you for final thoughts.
I mean, Steph said it perfectly. I mean, she pretty much stole what I wanted to say. Way to go, Steph. But really to reiterate, I mean, the lesson in all of this is making sure that our pivot to remote work really does work for everyone. So making sure that people still feel socially connected to folks, that we're addressing issues of mental health and wellness, that physically they are well equipped with, their ergonomic setup and things like that, and making sure that they have the tools and the work environment to support them in this. I say as some people kind of head back to the office where appropriate, I think it's about continuing with those digital behaviors. So even if you're in that boardroom and you're staring at that large monitor, just pretend like you're at home. Have your tablet in front of you, still use the hands up function, use the chat, have your video on. So that way everyone kind of stays on the same playing field. So that's what I would end with.
Awesome. Honey, over to you for final thoughts.
Thank you. Really grateful to be here because I'm hearing pretty much of very like echoed in different ways, the same shared vision. So we still want an agile, inclusive, equipped public service at the end of the day. And remote work is definitely a big part of that. And so going to end with a shameless plug in terms of adjusting to digital behaviors and skills and tools. The Digital Academy has so many things on offer and also different types of supports on offer. So please get in touch. There are also so many allies and members of this journey. And so I think we are always looking for the goal is to make something like this that seems like the exception to be the norm. And so join us in this mission.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Honey. Okay, and we are going to skip Neil and Erica for closing per their request, just to be clear. But I would like to thank all of our panelists. And I'll deliver some closing remarks, and then we will end actually with a 2-minute video that was just finished today, so hot off the virtual presses. So we will finish with that video and encourage you all to become digital nomads. But I'd like to thank all our panelists today. So Steph, Melanie, Honey, Neil, and Erica for sharing your experiences and really everything that you've contributed to make the public service work over the last 7.5 months, and what you'll do over the coming months to continue spreading the word and continue spreading innovation across the government of Canada. So a huge thanks to you. And thank you as well to our participants who joined us and shared your questions, your experience, and made this an incredibly engaging session. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get to every single question that was posted, but we do get a list of those questions afterwards, so we can figure out what we want to respond to and share those through either social media channels or on the FlexGC website. So thanks very much. And to mention as well that the next national event really for the Federal Youth Network will be on October 29th, as I mentioned, with Body Break on building a healthy, inclusive and diverse government of Canada. So it'll be very exciting. I'm very much looking forward to this. And please respond to the evaluation questionnaire that you'll get about this event afterwards, and provide your feedback on what you'd like to see from future events, but provide your feedback on what went well for today's webcast. So with that, and provided our AV team is good to go, we will end with the video of the digital nomads from FlexGC. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining us, and enjoy this video. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
I'm a free agent and co-founder of the FlexGC Network. I live and work in beautiful British Columbia, and I'm proud to say I took the FlexGC Digital Nomads Pledge.
Hi, I'm Jen McDougall from New Brunswick, and I'm a FlexGC Digital Nomad.
I'm Nisbeth from the National Managers Community, and I work in Winnipeg, and I am a FlexGC Digital Nomad.
Je m'appelle Paul Keller de Québec, et je suis un nomade numérique de FlexGC.
I'm Alia from FlexGC and the One Team Gov virtual team. I'm a FlexGC Digital Nomad.
Je suis Valérie de la Communauté nationale des gestionnaires. Je travaille à Montréal et je suis une nomade numérique FlexGC.
I'm Natasha from London, Ontario, and I'm a FlexGC Digital Nomad.
Je suis Nathalie de la Communauté nationale des gestionnaires, and I'm a FlexGC Digital Nomad.
Bonjour, je me nomme François Lamontagne et je suis un membre du réseau des jeunes fonctionnaires fédéraux et membre du réseau des jeunes professionnels, et je suis un nomade numérique FlexGC.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Christine Desna, chief of la promesse des nomades numériques FlexGC. Comme moi.
Hi, my name is Neil Bauer.
and I'm the Vice President of Innovation and Policy Services at the Canada School of Public Service, and I have just taken the GC Nomad Pledge. I pledge to be a good remote worker, a good remote colleague, and a good remote leader. And I'm going to build empathy for my colleagues that do remote work. I'm going to give remote work options, and I'm never going to sign another physical piece of paper if I can help it. I invite you to also take part in the GC Nomad Pledge.
My name is Frank Asu. I live and work out of Comox, British Columbia and Vancouver Island, and I took the pledge.
Did you take the pledge?
Signe la promesse.